What if I told you that there's something more difficult than beating every extreme demon in the game? This task is so inconceivably difficult, and yet, there's a group of people working together right now to try and complete this. I'll get to what this is in just a moment, but first let me ask you a simple question. Which of these two jumps are harder? Hopefully, you would have said that the one on the right is harder, and this is objectively true. At 60 FPS, the triple spike takes about twice as much precision. Determining this was easy and really simple to do, but what about for an entire Geometry Dash level? If you're seeing where I'm going with this, then you might have already guessed what I'm about to say next. The single most difficult thing in Geometry Dash isn't even playing the hardest levels, it's ranking them by difficulty. Now I know what you're thinking.
Oh, but we already have a demon list and they already rank the difficulty of the levels and it's not that hard.
So let me clear up this misconception. The demon list ranks the perceived difficulty of levels, which is different to objective difficulty. This is because a player's perception to how difficult a level is varies greatly between player to player. Factors like bias, individual skill sets, glory, consistency, and so much more influence how difficult a level feels to any given player. But is it even possible to come up with a factual, objective list that is 100% accurate? Let's find out. The first thing we need to do is understand how the current demon list works and why it keeps getting hate for being inaccurate. Many of you guys will already know how this works, so I'll make sure to keep it short. But if we look on the demon list website, we can see that when considering potential level placements and movements, players are contacted by the list team for their placement opinion and reliability. An opinion sheet is then used to aggregate the opinions of all reliable players. Essentially, if you beat a top extreme demon, a list moderator will ask you and a bunch of other players how difficult the level was. They'll exclude outliers and the opinions of those who seem untrustworthy to the list, calculate the average, and then that's how the list placement gets made. Two players with the exact same skill level could have completely different experiences playing the same level due to factors that are external to the game. So how could we make the perfect demon list? Let's go back to the question I asked earlier in the video. Which of these two jumps are harder? We can definitely feel that a triple spike is tighter than a double spike, but how could we quantify this? This is where we can use frame windows. The biggest contributing factor to a level's difficulty are simply the timings of each input, and a way that we can measure this is through frame windows. It works by analyzing each click that a player would have to make in order to complete any given jump. This would be done by getting the position of the earliest possible frame, the latest possible frame, and then adding them together. And as a baseline to determine which of two levels are harder, you could add up all the frame windows that appear in the level, divide it by the amount of clicks that you need to do, and whichever level allows more frames is easier. But what about for a situation like this? As you can see, we technically do only have one frame where the input is registered, making it technically a frame perfect. So how could we account for buffers? Well, all we have to do is start counting the frames from over here. This spider input has a total of 95 frames. Simple enough, right? But a level's average frame window is just one factor of the seemingly never-ending task, and the next things that we have to figure out are borderline impossible. The second thing to take into account are the different game modes. You could have the exact same frame window in a level, but the perceived difficulty can vary by vast amounts, depending on which game mode you're playing as. What this means for our difficulty formula is, we'll have to find some way to account for which game mode each input is done on. So the first thing to do would be to split the game modes into two groups: static and dynamic. A static game mode is anything where the duration that you hold down for doesn't affect your trajectory. Stuff like the ball, cube, and spider go here. Then there are the dynamic game modes. Essentially, game modes where your release time does make a difference. By default, dynamic game modes are twice as difficult, because instead of just timing your click, you also have to think about when to release. So for our formula, we can just say that any difference made by game modes will get multiplied by 2 if the game mode is dynamic. This is simplifying things by a lot, but have you seen any top level these days? These are pretty much all frame perfect clicks and releases. To give an example of how this double multiplier could look, let's say that one frame perfect cube jump would increase the difficulty of any level by 4 points. Instead, if it was a frame perfect wave timing, you would multiply those 4 points by 2. This isn't a perfect solution, but it'll do. Alright, so we have a way to differentiate static and dynamic game modes, but we still don't know the individual difficulties of each one in comparison to one another. But to fix that, we can look at the readability of each game mode and how much they're affected by physics. Following this rule, the easiest game modes in GD are the wave and the spider because they literally follow straight lines. And we can use this logic to continue for the rest of the game modes. Starting with all of the dynamic game modes first, the wave is by far the easiest because it goes in a straight line and it isn't affected by physics. Then we have the robot, and lastly, the ship. For the static game modes, the easiest is the spider, then we have the ball, followed by the UFO, cube, and lastly the swing. So for our formula, we can add slight multipliers based on how difficult each one is. So to find the overall difficulty, we'll track how many times a jump is made with each game mode, multiply each jump by their difficulty factor, and total the score. Then divide that by the level's average frame window, and what we have is essentially an ultra simplified version of NaN/GD's formula for calculating a level's difficulty. For reference, this is what his math looks like, but we can still go further to add more accuracy. And one way to do this is to consider the length of a level, and this in theory is pretty simple to calculate. Something that might make sense is just checking the number of seconds in a level, and the higher it is, the higher that our total score would get multiplied. Except there are a few huge problems with doing that. Firstly, the difficulty of a level doesn't increase linearly with time. Instead, it increases exponentially. If we took a level like Amethyst, which has a length of 1 minute and 42 seconds, and we just doubled everything so that you'd effectively have to complete Amethyst twice in a row, the doubled version wouldn't simply be twice as difficult, it would be many times harder than the original. So what's the solution? Now let me be honest here, I'm really grasping at straws, but essentially we need to find an exponential multiplier for each jump done further from the start of the level. Now, as anyone progresses through beating a level, their consistency increases drastically throughout the entire experience. And nerves don't really settle in until you're either at a new best or you've reached around 70% in the level. So instead of a drastic exponential curve, it would be really slight. Something like the difficulty of any jump, represented as d, multiplied by 1.005 to the power of t, or time, in seconds from the level's start. With this idea, a frame-perfect jump at 3 minutes into the level would be just under 2.5 times harder than a frame perfect at the first second into a level. We can also estimate that the difficulty of any jumps made in the last 10% of a level can get multiplied by 2 because of nerfs. Alright, so it seems like we're almost done, but let's just check what other variables we'd have to include. Overwhelmed with how much you have left to do, you decide to open Discord to search for answers. When a stream of notifications catches your attention, you open it to see that it's 2 people arguing about the difficulty of an extreme demon. These people have never met each other in their entire lives, and yet, here they are, fighting so passionately. You slowly feel a smile crawl across your face as you realize what you're trying to do would bring peace to the Geometry Dash community, which is why you decide to scrap the idea and enjoy the drama.